in my way of thinking, my intuitive process has much greater intelligence than my intelligence. Because if I was just to choose what I do, I would probably make much more different decisions, probably more based on popularity, or I don't want to be rejected.
Okay. It's my favorite song in the year I was born, so I was just...
Oh, thank you. Well, I was thinking of you. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm wondering if, like some of the other musicians, like yourself, iconic, what I consider to be iconic anyway, ever considered coming to Nashville and maybe doing a solo record with some of the local musicians here?
I've thought of all sorts of things, I think, like any community, you have to know people. And how can I put this? I can only relate to my experiences in LA as an industry town. And I've met a lot of people in LA who are incredible musicians who I wouldn't give the time of day to. Because to me, they don't play music. They play phrases, they play licks, they want to get themselves over, to use a wrestling term. Some of the best musicians I've played with in life are people who are idea people, who have an intuitive feel for what I'm trying to communicate, and their communication actually adds to my communication. As opposed to fighting through their concept of rock and roll. So what I'm saying is, I don't know if Nashville is the same, better, or worse.
I've played with a few the same, so it resonates.
Yeah, and obviously this town has really heated up in the last. Driving here, I can't even believe it's the same town I saw 20 years ago. It's like, wow. It's great. This town needs it and deserves it, so there's no issue there. But it's just like, wow, I can't believe it. So I'm sure the posers are arriving on the shores daily, and they look like various people who they want to be, and that's fine. It's rock and roll, but yes, sir.
First, thank you for sharing your art with us. This came to me last night in bed, and I got up and wrote it down. Over the past several years, you've spoken about hard times coming, and now seeing that global clash of ideas coming to fruition. I want to know how you cope and prepare spiritually, and how would you suggest other people prepare spiritually for the global situation?
Well, that's a great question. I think when you look at whether you want to look at the situation our country is, and obviously there's tons of opinions. There are literally 25 to 30% of these people in this country, no matter how they're polled, they think this country is doing great. I don't know what fucking country they're looking at. Excuse my French. No idea. No idea. When you look at unemployment, the numbers are fudged. You look at, the fact that most working class people, they're earning the same median salary they were earning in 1972. I'm sorry. I come from working class. I don't fucking buy it. Excuse my French. Sorry, stop swearing. I have a child now. I have to stop swearing. So there's a spiritual concept, which is if you can't see whoever's across from you as a brother or sister, you can't really ever fix it. But that also doesn't mean that if somebody's coming at you with a punch, you're supposed to just stand there and take it. I think turn the other cheek means, to me in a spiritual context, doesn't mean let somebody punch you in the face. Although Christ's example is he took the ultimate punch in the face with grace. But that's why he's up there and we're down here yucking it up. Point being is that I think in daily life, having empathy for people's occlusion or stupidity or lack of curiosity, which I think is probably one of the biggest problems in our culture right now. It's a lack of curiosity. To want to know someone doesn't mean you have to agree with them. I like to know people who don't like me because I want to understand the way that they think. And oftentimes, same thing I was saying before, oftentimes when I understand the way they think, I realize they don't even see me as a human being. So if I take it personal, I'm just in the game, I'm playing the same game they are. If I understand that they actually get off by writing something mean on the internet, that's the peak of their day. That's the most exciting thing they did that day. Well, if you come from a Christ-like point of view, which I try to be as a student of Christ, you would have empathy for that person. You'd actually feel sad for that person, even though they're inflicting pain on you. It's negotiating the empathetic part of humanity that actually reminds you that this is a really long story that's played out over hundreds of thousands of years, and we haven't solved it yet. But there has never been a time where seeing your enemy as the enemy forever has ever worked. And you even see situations like where World War II soldiers get together with German World War II soldiers, and they sit around and talk about how they used to bomb the what out of each other. And there's some form of healing there, because at the end of the day, they were just pawns in a bigger game. So if that can happen, then anything can happen. Anyway, I don't want to go on about it too long, but thank you. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Along the line of spirituality, I really enjoyed attending that 2-hour night conference that you were at Wilmot Theater with Jen Weigel. I was
Thank you.
It has nothing to do with music, but I'm really interested in your thoughts on doing more of those kind of evening sessions.
I'll explain. Yeah, a friend of mine who's a spiritual author asked me to have a 2-hour chat, and basically was like, she could ask, like you can ask me a question. So we talked a lot about spiritual issues and culture. I think the difficulty is with those types of things is everyone's an expert now. And the minute you step out of your lane, uprises this voice that says, who are you and why are you here? I faced it in poetry world, of all places. I mean, I thought that would be an easy translation. I'm a lyricist, I'm a songwriter, I want to put out a poetry book. I got beat to death by poetry world because I did not belong in poetry world. It didn't help that I made a joke when my book came out that went something like, I'm afraid of men with beards and women who don't shave their legs. Referring to poets. They didn't like that. Obviously, the point being, poets can't take a joke. So I'd like to do more of that, and I have considered doing more of that, and I've even thought about having kind of spiritual get-togethers like that at my tea house. Sort of an informal, non-denominational talk, to talk about spirituality, because I think communion is important, fellowship. The difficulty is I don't want it to be about me. And invariably somebody's standing there with a camera and waiting, literally, for me to say the one thing that can make a headline out of. And if they're not doing it, somebody's watching it. I even think there were some headlines that did come out of that, I don't even remember.
Yeah,
Stupid stuff.
Yes, it was disappointing because I was there for the full 2.5 hours, and I think it went very well. We talked about gratitude, about things that motivate you every day, and it was very nice.
I can give you 2 quick examples. Recently I was interviewed by Rolling Stone, and they asked me about the Rock and Hall of Fame. Do you think the Pumpkins belong in the Hall of Fame? And I said, if it's a meritocracy, yes. And then I wanted to list all the bands that should go in for the Smashing Pumpkins based on that headline. Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins belong in the Hall of Fame. It's not really what I said, but technically I said that, but I didn't say it like that. I did a talk at South by Southwest about 3 years ago with Brian Solis, who's like a pioneer in tech, social discourse, whatever. I don't know. You probably know more about them than I do. I talked about for an hour and a half. About an hour. At one point he said, how many people, there was 1,500 people in the audience, he said, how many people in this audience have bought Smashing Pumpkins albums? Literally 97% of the people raised their hand. So obviously there's an audience. I'm South by Southwest. I have credibility with the audience. When I made a critical comment about Radiohead, the audience gasped. Because in that world, that's a sacred cow, and you don't criticize, Radiohead. And I didn't even say anything that was even that crazy. Article in Rolling Stone, Billy Corgan rants. I never once raised my voice. I talked literally like I'm talking to you. I talked probably passionately about what the things I believed in. And Billy Corgan rants. So for the 1,500 people that were there, that at least have some respect for what I've done, even if it was 20 years ago, who listened, hopefully attentively, and we had a conversation, the rest of the world sees Billy Corgan rants. So Billy Corgan's an asshole. You can't go back to spiritually. You can't slay that dragon. You can't. There's no slaying that dragon. So all I can do is be myself. So I'm trying to figure out how to be myself in those contexts, because I do think it's important. But I don't want to be Billy Corgan da-da-da-da-da guy. I just like to be a human being who can sit and have a conversation with you about things that matter, because I want to learn. I'm curious. And I think that's American, really. That's what makes our country so incredible, is that curiosity and that willingness to learn. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I was at the show last night, and the interplay between you and Jeff has just gotten better and better since you guys have been together. And I was curious what the practice schedule's like, or rehearsal schedule, and how you guys go about setting that.
Well, normally if we're going to prepare for a tour, Jeff and I start by ourselves. So like this tour run, we started. We worked for about a week, just he and I. And then Katie joined us for a few days, and we worked together. And then Jimmy joined us, and we worked together. And I think it's that quiet respect and friendship that we've built over time that allows that communication. There's nothing, like there's no gag, like we can go one show where we don't even look at each other because it's just about listening and playing really good, and then we'll have another show where we're laughing like this is so fucked. Excuse me. I thought, we thought the audience last night was just like, I don't know what show they came to see. They didn't come to see the Smashing Pumpkins 2016. They came to see Grunge Unplugged 1994. So we just look at each other like, oh my God, what can we do? We're playing acoustic guitars.
And I had one more quick
Sure.
follow-up question. You've mentioned going to Canes again because the crowd there has been really, really good to you. And you mentioned about recording this project. Is that a possibility?
I think there's like 10 things that we want to do, and I think it's just picking the right order. Because, again, we're dealing in stupid headline world. So I was starting to make an acoustic album, which I've written songs for, and we were kind of leaning that way. And now if we make a Smashing Pumpkins acoustic album, everyone's going to go, well, wait, didn't that guy come back? Like, why aren't you guys doing... It's a stupid world. So unfortunately, you have to think like that. So what we try to do is figure out what we want to do and figure if we could make a schedule where we could do everything we want to do in a way that's prudent, is the word I would use. Yes, sir?
Is there still a chance that you'll release an original content acoustic album?
I would say right now I would probably lean towards making a solo album, which the irony would be everybody that was on stage in Chicago would probably be on the album. I just don't think Smashing Pumpkins' acoustic album is going to work right now because the expectation is we're going to go back to playing epic flaming rock, and I don't have a problem with that. But if I said, well, I want to do this first and put it out, and then we're going to do that, if people don't like that, they're not going to want to hear the flaming rock album. It's just the way it works. It's maddening. The one thing you realize in this journey is that you have nothing in the bank account. Every time is the first time. So, I mean, I've seen fans. This is probably the best period the band has had right now. Is the best period the band has had probably since, like, I can't remember, 98, 97. And I've seen fans that have stuck with the band through the whole time leaving now. And you're like, why are these fans leaving? Like, they start acting really weird and they kind of buzz off. And you find yourself like, what happened to Joe? Like, how come he doesn't come anymore? They don't want to see the band succeed. They actually were kind of addicted to the band being kind of broken. It's weird. So when the band starts to get popular again and strong again, they're like, no, they're bored. They want a reality show. They don't want, like, this thing. And then the mainstream people come back and they assume they know what this means. And you're like, never been that way. So that starts a different fight. You had a question, sir? Oh.
Yeah. Outside of your musical career, what's been your favorite or best accomplishment that's really resonated with you?
Honestly, not a lot. I think the only thing I'd point to is the things I've been able to do for charities, and whether it's Paws or Sea Shepherd, which is not a charity, but obviously very aggressive in trying to protect the sea community. It's maddening when you look at like the South Pole and there are laws in the books that you're not supposed to whale, and there's people down there every year whaling. It's like, I mean, maddening. You think it's like a done issue, and you find out, no, not a done issue. So I would say that's the proudest thing I've been able to accomplish. But I think, honestly, if you ever read the book that I'm still writing, it's approximately 500 pages and counting. I mean, my life's been a total mess. I mean, I'm not proud of that. I've had a very good musical life and career, to use the word of pavement, and but my life's been a total mess. So it's And look, this place is full of ghosts of people who were really, really amazing and had total messed up lives, right? That balance is not easy to accomplish, and it's nobody's fault. It's really your own. But fame is a very intoxicating thing. Yes, sir.
How does the critical or commercial reception affect your attachment to a piece of art you created, or do you keep those things separate, or were you attached to something, an album you created, and how it was received affected how you viewed it?
Did everyone hear that in the back? He was asking about how critical reception and how it affects me. I mean, I've had to, if I can come at your question from a Buddhistic point of view, if that's even a word, one of the tenets of Buddhism is, or the main tenets is non-attachment. So I had to learn to literally detach from every opinion. If I could have a magic box and put all the criticism in one and the happy things in the other and just read the happy things, that would be great, but I can't do that. It's just not in my personality. So for me, it was about wiping it all out. So people say nice things to me all the time, and I do appreciate them, but they do not penetrate my being because they can't. And that sucks because that's not really the life I want to live. I wish every compliment was earnest and didn't involve a selfie at the end of it. And every criticism was from the root of the word critique. Like, hey, I'm telling you this because I want you to be better. You know what I mean? Like, I see what you're trying to do, and I actually want it to be better. Like, I work in professional wrestling, right? My job as a producer and as somebody in the office is when somebody comes through the curtain, my job is to pull them aside and tell them what they did wrong or not right so that they can be better. Not because I want to, I know better than you. And once the talent that you work with realize that you're actually there to help them, then you build trust, and they'll open up about, oh yeah, I was going for that. And that's unfortunately the problem with, if you can step back and see it the way we see it, most critical review in the media is 90% based on opinion and personality. Has nothing to do with history, the arc that you're on, the thing you're trying to accomplish. I mean, obviously every album I've made has not been to, what John Lennon called the flaming pie in the sky. It's like I've made weird albums on purpose. And then they write like you're an idiot. My favorite example of this of all time, there was a very respected critic. I don't know what's happened to him. I don't see his name much anymore. His name is John Perellis. He wrote for the New York Times. The New York Times has obviously lost some power in our culture, but in the 90s, the New York Times was like, you got the good review in the New York Times like you were a made man. And there was a review of The Machina, which was our last 90s album. And I wrote a line in a song called Heavy Metal Machine, which was almost like the same guy who wrote Bullet with Butterfly Wings being even more ironic. So there's a line in the song, I think it's in the second verse, where I sing, if I was dead, would my record sell? Okay? And John Perellis, a very, very good critic, who made other people, including Radiohead, look really, really good, wrote, this guy's such an idiot that he actually thinks we care about this concept. I mean, he actually singled that line out and held it up like, this is why this guy's a fucking idiot. It never occurred to him I was being ironic or poking fun or like that I wasn't in on the joke. So when you're treated in the public that you're not in the joke, I mean, where do you go from there? I one time appeared, we were getting so much crap in the English press that I appeared on stage in a clown suit for an encore, and they actually wrote, this guy's such an idiot, he doesn't realize how dumb he looks. But that was actually the genesis of the Zero character, because by negating myself, I inverted the process. In essence, I took myself down so low to almost nothing. No hair, no fancy stuff, black shirt, silver pants. You have nothing of me anymore. It actually inverted the process. It made me beautiful in this way that I couldn't have been if I was always trying to figure out. So it's complicated what I'm trying to say, and I'm not saying you can't get into it. It's like hard to talk about it without going into the whole ocean of the idea. So one or two more. Yes, sir.
So first of all, the fact that you and Liz Fair are playing together is like the greatest wet dream come true for me. I'm telling you. So, anyway.
I don't know what part I have in the wet dream.
But so one of the things I always catch myself doing is when I'm listening to a certain album, I always kind of imagine the style that the band was during that era. Like I think of like Gish will sort of have like a psychedelic look. I always call Siamese Ring the thrift store look, and then like the glam grunge and the gothic. And so my question was kind of, did you guys sit down as a band kind of during each album and say, this is the style we want to do? And it was kind of funny, you sort of mentioned the zero shirt and the pants, kind of talking about that last question, but I was just wondering how that process came about, if it was something natural or if y'all actually sat down and like who kind of came up with those ideas?
Never discussed it except the Machine album, which was all rooted in conceptual and playing characters. And then, as I've said a few times, everyone agreed to wear the clothes that we had made by a very famous designer, and we paid all this money, and then within a couple weeks, Jimmy and Jeff, I think, pretty much stopped wearing the clothes. So I was the one in the bat dress, and no one knew why. Like if the whole band was in the bat dress look, it kind of would have made sense. But they decided they didn't want to wear it, so we had all these really expensive clothes that they didn't want to wear. It was very, and then I was too stubborn. I'm like, I'm going to wear this bat dress no matter what. So, yes, ma'am.
This is for the compliment box. You're wicked hot, but why do you always dress like you're cold?
Because I'm cold.
You really are?
I'm actually cold. Have you ever shaved your head?
No.
Yeah, I mean, you shave your head, you lose a lot of temperature to the top there, so it becomes an issue. Okay, last one. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of compliments, you have always been such an inspiration for me to write and become a poet myself. Is there anything that inspires your writing? Is it melodic? Is it just intuition based? What sort of things inspire your writing?
Kind of going back to similar comments, I've had to detach from. There was a time where I was in step with the culture, and even though I didn't necessarily like the way we were being portrayed, there was a fight there that I could get into. And so over the last 10 years, I've had to completely detach myself from the way the band is viewed, which I think actually has a lot to do with the strength of the band now, because we are really back to we don't care. We started at we don't care, we've arrived back at we don't care. And maybe it took 30 years, but that's why I think if we can navigate these channels up ahead, there's still a lot of years there for the band to do damage in the way that we were designed to do damage. I was saying yesterday at the VIP in Louisville that I would love to go after the millennials. That would be, it's like that cartoon, you know, where the guy's hungry and his friend turns into a piece of turkey and he's salivating. I just look at the millennial generation, I'm like, oh man, I would love to go at you with the full Death Star sound. It's just, it's almost orgasmic, the thought. Seriously. So I know that's not what you're asking for my own version of what. But the point is I still yesterday I made this analogy, like if you've ever seen like The Bride of Frankenstein and they go back in the lab and all the equipment is all dusty and they fire it up and it crackles back to life. That architecture, what I would call the nihilistic bent of the 90s era Smashing Pumpkins is very much intact in the back of my brain. I just pushed it in the back when I just thought it was no longer relevant or needed or even worth getting into. Because, there's no pressing one button in that. If you look at what we've tried to do, and I would include Zeitgeist as maybe the end of this version, so you can draw a line between the 90s into the one sort of, not the Zeitgeist album. It was always like pressing as many buttons in the spaceship as possible, and if it blows us up, then it was always our attitude was like, who cares? And at some point we just stopped doing that, and we've gone back to just trying to be a musical band. But if you're talking about inspiration, as opposed to just gross material product, like there's an audience and you need to make music to give to the audience, and maybe they like it, maybe they don't. As far as me as an artist, the idea of going after that generation, like firing up the Frankenstein equipment one more time, I just salivate. I literally just salivate. And the thing I would say, so it doesn't sound all critical, the millennials exist in that social space the way that they do, running around hashtagging everything to death, because Generation X abandoned its original version of the same idea. So what was a flesh and blood, street-based movement where different communities came together because there were no alternative communities as they would be expressed now. So like I knew most of the people at the gay club, I knew most of the people at the teen club, I knew most of the people at the punk shows, because there were only about 1,000 of us. So we commingled in a shared community that would now be called alternative. Back then it was called like punk rock or whatever. And so you got to empathize and understand people at the street level because they were at the real street level struggle of what it meant to be disenfranchised because of the way they looked. I mean, I knew kids who, because they had like black hair, were thrown out. You know, their family threw them out and all that stuff. I would say at least half of the women that I encountered in my youth told me stories of being molested, incest. I mean, it was unbelievable the amount of sexual trauma that I heard from people that I knew. And I'm not even talking about people I had relationships with, just friends. It was shocking to me. Here I was in this supposedly like this urbane community of Chicago. So if you can understand it, when Gen X coalesced around these ideas and began to crystallize these things, and Kurt Cobain probably being the best version of that, that message had a real intensity to it because it was real, because you knew those people and you were speaking for those people in a, maybe not a conscious way, but a subconscious way, and representing those values. And then at some point Gen X just went, we're out. People died, people got bored with us, and we just jumped off that ship, and here we are 20-something years later, and a bunch of people running around digitally representing what was once a real movement of social consciousness that had, the goal wasn't to separate, the goal was to integrate. Which, in essence, the goal of that community was, why are we being treated so bad, or why are we being pushed out if we have uncomfortable things to say? Now it's actually, victimhood is actually sort of a badge of honor. And that's not Gen X's thing. Gen X's thing was, I'm going to say what I got to say and move on. Not use these things like weapons to drive our culture into the ground. So that's why I salivate. Because not only would I be going at a generation that I think has puffed itself up like a puffer fish, and I don't buy it, and I've never bought it. But conversely, it also means one more go at my people who, as I pointed out yesterday, I started going at after '94. When I looked out there in those Lollapalooza crowds and saw the football players that I grew up with, the same people that were punching me in the head a couple years before because I had a funny haircut, I thought, this is wrong, this is going to go bad, and it did. So that route from, standing, at the Dunkin' Donuts in the middle of the night talking to some skinhead about why anarchy was good, in 1986, to watching Nirvana play and going, okay, that guy is representing that, and I get that, to watching it all kind of fall apart, to then watching all these little social butterflies float around and tell me what I can say, what I can't say, what I'm entitled to think, what I'm not entitled to think, what I don't have a right to have an opinion about, including God, because I haven't earned my social stripe. Trust me, it's like, just I want to bash that, because it needs to be bashed.